In Quebec, because this is something that doesn't exist in other provinces, that doesn't exist in other countries.
Oh.
And that is why a lot of people, when they say condo, they don't look past the word condo. In Quebec, we have two types of co-ownerships: undivided and divided co-ownership. Divided co-ownership is when you buy your condo with your lot number, and you also buy a share of the common area. So let's say you're in a building, you have a share of the hallways, you have a share of the, I don't know, the gym, the elevators, etc. But you own your condo, which has its own lot number. Undivided co-ownership, on the contrary, is you own a percentage of the building. This happens a lot in areas like, for example, the Plateau. So when you see those duplexes and triplexes, undivided co-ownership, so you don't really own your condo, you own a percentage, a share of the whole building, and you have the right to use one specific condo.
Oh, I see. And why do so many buyers believe that they're purchasing a condo when it's actually an undivided?
Because when you go look at centuries, you, for example, or you look at properties and you say, I want to buy a condo, everything is going to show up. But technically speaking, undivided condos shouldn't be called condos. And it's also because, like I was mentioning, there's a lot of other countries where this does not even exist. So people don't understand, don't know what type of co-ownership they're buying, and it's until it's the time, for example, to get finance, to put their down payment, to read the information of the co-ownership. So it's very important to understand the difference between those types of co-ownerships.
And here in Quebec, have you witnessed some type of popularity between both?
It is, divided co-ownership is the most popular one, but like I was saying, in sectors or in boroughs such as the Plateau Mont-Royal, as much as you want to buy divided co-ownership, the majority are undivided. So whoever is set on buying in the Plateau Mont-Royal is going to face the situation that the majority of the condos that are up for sale are in an undivided co-ownership, but the most popular one is the divided one.
I see. And talking about legal matters, what legal implications exist in undivided co-ownership that do not exist in divided co-ownership?
So in undivided co-ownership, you are tied to the other co-owners. The mortgage is with the same bank. It's a mortgage in which all of the other co-owners are named. In the divided co-ownership, you have your own mortgage. You choose the bank that you decide to work with. In an undivided co-ownership, no. In case one of the co-owners does not pay the mortgage, the bank can come to look for the payment. They can come towards you because it's like if you were buying with a husband. If you don't pay, your husband has to pay, and vice versa. So in an undivided co-ownership, you're all tied. Like I was saying, you do not own your own lot. You have a percentage. You have a right of usage, and all the obligations are mentioned in the Indivision Agreement. So it is very important to read the Indivision Agreement, because if there's, like, for example, verbal agreements, you're not protected. So you really have to understand, and you have limited control over your condo. For example, in the I'm going to say 95% of the undivided co-ownerships, when you're going to sell, the other co-owners have a right of first refusal, which means that once you get an offer on your condo, you then have to go offer it to the other neighbor. And if the other neighbor is able to buy in the same conditions as the offer you got, they have the right to buy the condo first.
Interesting. And I'm just curious, with the type of condos that are like that and the buildings, who decides the type of ownership of a building?
It is legally established. So before you go, it's not like you go and you decide, okay, we're gonna be divided, we're gonna be undivided. No, it's already established by law. So by how you register the property at the land registry. Okay. The thing is that if you own a triplex, I am the sole owner of a triplex, and I want to sell the 3 floors as condos. The only thing I can do as a first step is to sell them as undivided condos. I cannot do it as a divided co-ownership. Once there are 3 different owners, we can decide that we convert it into a divided co-ownership. So it's because a lot of the buildings that used to be solely owned, in the process of the conversion, the first step is undivided co-ownership, unless they were built since the beginning as divided condos. So the big buildings, they are already built as undivided condos, but if you own a 6-plex and you want to then sell each apartment, people think, oh, I'm going to buy a 6-plex and then I'm going to sell it as separate condos. You have to convert it into a co-ownership, and the first step is an undivided co-ownership.
Interesting. And how does the financial financing differ between divided and undivided properties?
So on a divided co-ownership, you can go with any bank. You can buy with 5% if it's under 500,000, depending. But if it's under 500, it's 5%. And it's a standard mortgage. You sign your own deed of mortgage, and you have all the obligations and the rights established. You own your condo. In an undivided co-ownership, there are only 2 lenders in Quebec. You can only have a mortgage with the National Bank and with La Caisse des Jardins. The other thing, and you cannot choose. You have to go with the financial institution that the other co-owners are being financed, because you're all in the same mortgage. So if the other co-owners have the mortgage with Desjardins, you can't go to National Bank, you have to go to Desjardins. The other thing is that you need a minimum 20% down payment. It doesn't matter what is the value of the property. And the other thing is that, legally speaking, and this is not financial, but this is in another, but you cannot rent out your unit.
That's what I wanted to know. Is there a reason why?
Because when you're solidarily responsible with the other co-owners, the bank that is lending you the money, because they're taking a higher risk, they want you to be the one occupying the unit. So you are not, you legally, you cannot rent out your unit. There are people that do it without the bank knowing, and the problem with that is that in an undivided co-ownership, when you have a tenant, the repossession laws that you have with the divided co-ownership do not apply. What does this mean? If you have an undivided condo, you have it rented, and you want to sell it, and that person that buys it wants to occupy, they have to wait until the tenant voluntarily leaves. You cannot do like with a divided co-ownership, that if you become an owner, you send the tenant a notice 6 months before the expiry of the lease that you're going to occupy, and you can occupy. In an undivided co-ownership, you cannot. Repossession laws don't apply. The tenant can stay as long as he or she wants.
That sounds risky.
Yeah.
And talking about risks, what risks does buyer face when they purchase an undivided property without properly reviewing the undivided agreement?
So the Indivision Agreement is what's going to establish all the rules of what you can do, what you cannot do, what is assigned to you. So in the Indivision Agreement, when you buy a divided co-ownership, there's also the Declaration of Co-ownership. There's not much you can do with that. People read it a little bit quick, although they should read it with conscientiously, but there's not many risks. In the undivided co-ownership, the Indivision Agreement is going to tell you what is the unit you can occupy. If there's parkings, for example, because they don't have different lot numbers, the Indivision Agreement is going to say, for example, apartment number 1 has the right to use the parking number 1. Everything that is written there, those are the rules that are going to tell you what you can do and what you cannot do. The problem is that there are a lot of undivided co-ownership with many verbal agreements.
Okay.
And those verbal agreements don't hold. If they tell you you have the right to use a parking space, and when you read the Undivision Agreement, it's not clearly written, you cannot use it because you don't have a lot number that gives you the right to use it.
Oof.
And many times when buyers are going through the due diligence, the response is, oh, but we've never had problems. Yeah, well, you've never had problems until now, but you might have in the future. So if you are buying an undivided co-ownership, read word by word the Indivision Agreement so you know what you're getting into.
I would like to know, is there any difference between the type of management around this syndicate between a divided and undivided?
Well, actually, the undivided co-ownerships are typically very small. So it's typically a duplex, a triplex, so like 2 apartments, 3 apartments, 4 apartments. So it's the sole, it's the owners that manage it.
Yeah.
They're rarely managed by an external company. But what is important to say is that this new Law 16 that imposes so many obligations to co-ownerships do not apply to undivided co-ownerships.
Oh,
So,
no way.
yeah,
Why
so-
is that? Is it more complicated to manage or how?
Good question. I don't know the answer.
Okay.
But all of this contingency fund, self-insurance fund, the asset management plan, and all of that, they don't apply to undivided co-ownerships. But Desjardins and National Bank now, them as financial institutions, are becoming very picky with undivided co-ownerships that are not saving money for future works. So even if the law technically does not impose this contingency and self-insurance fund and all of that, the banks can refuse financing or can refuse a sale if the building is not saving money for future works. So yes and no. Ideally, if you're in undivided co-ownership, you should still try to follow Law 16 in order to have a healthy co-ownership and a healthy, well-maintained building.
And I want to know about the comité. What do you say that in English?
Committees?
Committee. Yeah, the committees of ownership in an undivided ownership. Do you think that because they all own the whole space, they tend to be more complicated?
They do tend to be a little bit more complex in the sense that they know that what the other neighbor is doing is directly affecting their ownership.
Yes.
When you're in a divided co-ownership, you say, okay, you want to, I don't know, you want to have your condo ugly and dirty and whatever. It's your condo, as long as you don't do that in the common spaces.
Yeah.
That's in the case of a divided co-ownership. But in the case of an undivided one, because you own a share of the whole building, technically a share of your apartment is mine, and a share of mine is yours. So neighbors are really picky, and that's why it's also very important when you're buying in an undivided co-ownership to try to put a condition where you can meet the neighbors, because you want to know who you're dealing with. You want to know who is solidarily responsible with you in the mortgage. So ideally, you should try to meet the neighbors. You should try to, and if you cannot meet them, ask a lot of questions. Who are they? What do they do? What is their financial profile? So the broker in charge of that property should be able to give you as much information as possible, because it is a big commitment to buy in an undivided ownership.
And do you think that would be a red flag or a deal breaker for someone who's in a deal or in a process to buy a condo who is that's undivided?
The fact of not knowing who the neighbors are,
exactly, because you're responsible to get to know everybody, but if you are not able to see how responsible they are, do you think that that's a risk factor?
Well, it is a risk factor, but I would say that if you cannot meet them personally, at least get information from them. Get information, ask your broker to download the previous deed of sale to know what's the names of the persons that are your neighbors. Google them. Try to, when you do the visit, try to see who are the neighbors, because you can end up with somebody that, for example, inherited a condo and that is living in the condo and has it like a dump, and that's going to be your neighbor. So the due diligence process has to be even more thorough and more, you really have to know who you're getting in bed with.
I know we talked a bit about the spaces, but I would like to go more in depth of how our exclusive use of spaces like parking, balconies, storage, and yard are handled in an undivided ownership.
So because you don't technically own your balcony, your parking space, your locker, your unit, you have to understand very well what are your rights of usage for each of them. So like I was saying before, if they tell you that you have a parking comes with the apartment, but when you go and read in the Indivision Agreement, there is no right of usage of the parking. It's like you're buying air. Mm-hmm. So everything has to be clearly written in the Indivision Agreement. Very important. All the rules. Who has a right of first refusal? What happens in case one of the owner passes away? Everything there has to be a very specific document. Well, the document is called the Indivision Agreement, but there has to be very specific mention to every single right. For example, is the right of usage of my balcony or a backyard. Mm-hmm. Let's say you're in the first floor. Do I really have the exclusive use of the backyard? Or is it all the co-owners that have the right of using it?
Good point. Yeah.
So very important to know, is it an exclusive use or is it a shared use? Normally, in a co-ownership like that, you would have, if you're in the first floor, you have the right to use the backyard, but the neighbors have the right to pass through your backyard in case of an emergency. If you're in the first floor of an undivided co-ownership, the crawl space is under the unit that you have the right. Can any co-owner come knock on my door and say that they want to go to the crawl space anytime? No. In the Indivision Agreement, there has to be established, for example, that the access to the crawl space by the co-owners that are not occupying the unit on the first floor is only in case of emergency, or but it can't be, because if not, imagine everyone knocking and, hey, I want to store my hockey sticks on the crawl space, and you are in the first floor and you have to open 10 times for them. So all of these things, because you don't own the lot, have to be very clearly specified in the Indivision Agreement.
You touched a very interesting point before, and it was death. What happens in that situation? Because in cases of separation, death, or disputes, what happens to an undivided unit versus a divided condo?
In an undivided condo, you go through succession, you sell your unit, that's it, that's all.
Yes.
In an undivided co-ownership, you have to do the succession, you have to see what the right of first refusal establishes. So the process is way more complex, and most probably that transfer of ownership is going to have to be done with the same notary that did the Indivision Agreement of the co-ownership, because it's the one that handles all the transactions in the co-ownership. So it makes it more complex. It really makes it more complex.
And I know it feels like you're in a marriage with someone that you don't know.
Exactly. That's totally it. That's totally
What happens
it.
between disputes?
Arranged marriage.
Exactly. What happens when there are disputes or you don't get along with another owner?
You have the Indivision Agreement that establishes, but if, for example, you have, each of you have 33%, and you want to redo the balconies, and there is one of the owners that doesn't want to do them, you can't really do much because that person has 33%. So you need the majority to do it. So
exactly.
You really need to know who your neighbor is, and you have to, you really have to get along with your neighbors. And
have you had any cases of wanting to sell a condo that it's undivided, and have you had any complications?
I rarely take listings for undivided co-ownerships, but I do have buyers that have bought in undivided co-ownerships, and we had a little bit of complication that at the end ended up being solved, and it was because the parents of my client were the buyers, but they were not going to occupy. So the other co-owners were trying to say that the daughter was like a renter, so she was not permitted to live there. But because we knew that was going to come up in the offer, I wrote a clause saying that the parents were the owners, but that the other co-owners were authorizing the daughter to live there without any lease or any type of leasing agreement. So not to open the door to leasing the property. And that's how we were able to solve that thing. But just to let you know, it's like parents are buying for their kid and the kid cannot occupy. So you have to be very careful when you're negotiating an offer with an undivided co-ownership.
That is something that we see more in the Plateau and in Montreal area. Have you known any other cities outside of Montreal that use it?
I don't think outside Montreal is very common, actually. I've seen it in the Plateau, I've seen it in Rosemont, and it's very rare outside Montreal. I think it's more like a Plateau thing.
Okay, now we know where to go if you want one or not.
Yes, exactly.
What happens if one co-owner wants to sell and another one doesn't?
Well, you have to, when you're going to sell, you're going to have to put it up for sale, and you either have to get the other co-owners to waive their right of first refusal rights in a letter, or if they don't waive it beforehand, once you get an offer on the condo you're selling, you have to go to the co-owners and they have to decide if they want to buy in the same terms as the buyer you have. And if they don't, then they have to waive their rights, but that can take time. So that's why in the Indivision Agreement, it's very important to understand what is the timeline, or what is how many days does the other co-owners have to exert to use that right of first refusal. Because imagine if they take a month to tell you, well, you're going to lose your buyer.
Yes.
So that's why the Indivision Agreement, it's very important to know all of the timelines and everything.
So does that mean that for the purchasing process, there has to be more flexibility?
A little bit more flexibility, yeah. You have to be flexible with your timelines because you have to wait for the co-owners to answer. And sometimes if the Indivision Agreement says they have 8 days, they're going to take literally the 8 days to decide.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
And what red flags should a buyer look when analyzing an undivided plex or project?
Anything that is informal or verbal agreements. You have to have a very well written Indivision Agreement. You have to understand the complexities. You have to understand how you can get financed. So I'm going to say it's mainly the Indivision Agreement. No verbal agreements, please. Don't accept anything that says, oh, it's because that's how we used to do it, or that's how we've always done it. That doesn't hold. No.
I'm just wondering because at the plateau, in the Mont-Royal area, where this type of condos, and they are pretty old usually. Do you think that they're already been paid off and they don't have a mortgage, or they continue to still have?
No,
Because what happens when they're already paid off?
Many do. Many are paid off.
And what happens there?
Well, the only co-owner that is going to have a mortgage, then he's the only one that's gonna be in the mortgage. So the other ones are not responsible because they have, well, no, they're kind of responsible still. Good question.
Because
I
if
don't know,
they're
I
already
think-
paid off and they're selling, where is that money going to?
Well, no, it goes to each of the co-owners that sells.
Okay.
But let's say two co-owners have no mortgage, but one does. I do believe that the other two co-owners are still responsible if the one that has the mortgage doesn't pay.
Interesting. And for a final advice, when should someone choose a divided versus an undivided ownership?
So divided, first-time home buyers, I'm going to say people that want to rent out their condos, so investment, people that don't have a 20% down payment. And undivided, I'm going to say it's not bad. It's a very good opportunity for have more cash and that know what they're getting into, that are more educated buyers. Why? Because when you buy an undivided co-ownership, the price is lower, taxes are lower, and there is an opportunity to convert that undivided co-ownership into a divided co-ownership and make money in the resale. So if you are an educated buyer, you have the cash, you know how to read Indivision agreements, undivided co-ownerships are a good idea to buy.
Interesting. Thank you so much, Catalina, for this episode.
My pleasure, and we'll see each other in a couple of weeks.
Yes.